The Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.
Welcome back to Football Has a Problem, and thank you for joining us. Now, before we get going, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell button below. It helps this channel to grow. Big thank you to everybody who is subscribing, and we're going to discuss the playoffs today. You might think we're both Premier League fans. AFC Bournemouth, of course, have been in the playoffs in the past. Arsenal, I don't think you've ever been in a playoff match, have you?
No, we actually haven't been relegated, but in many ways, there's a part of me that thinks that it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, because you take a look at some of the bigger clubs over the years who've gone on to win really big things. They've actually experienced relegation at least once. And so our European legacy, for example, Craig, is absolutely appalling. The only two trophies we've won are now defunct, and one of those trophies isn't even recognised by UEFA, although it was a sort of precursor to what is now effectively the Europa League. But, we pride ourselves on being a team that's never been relegated, never having to experience the playoffs. But I think it was Richard Nixon, before leaving the White House, and I'm sorry for mentioning him, not the best example, who said, it's only when you have gone to the deepest trench that you can understand how it feels to be atop the highest mountain. So, and especially with several teams over the years proving that you are never too big to go down, and it's how you're able to come back up that will determine how, tough you are. I'm in two minds. I mean, maybe you can't, please don't quote me on this, but if relegation means that we end up realizing that we have to start improving ourselves and becoming a better team and not taking things for granted, then I suppose it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I know a lot of Arsenal fans are going to want to kill me for this, but it is what it is.
No, fair point. And of course, we've been, through the leagues. We've played in the League Two playoffs. We played in the League One. We played in the Championship. But Manny, it's always a pleasure to have you on here, and we're going to discuss the football pyramid, and of course there is some changes with regards to the playoffs for next season, in fact. But I tell you what, let's go in quickly, and I'm going to talk about how the playoffs actually started, because they did start, quite some time ago, and there was a reason why they actually started. So during the mid-1980s, as everybody will know in this country, there was a big problem with football matches. The attendances went down, and of course, a lot of it was down to the hooligan element in football at that time. And of course, there was a number of tragedies, not connected to the hooligan element, I should say, that happened around that time as well. I don't want to go too much into the tragedies. Everybody knows what they are. But what football needed to do, and the EFL needed to do, was to bring fans back to the game. The attendances were going down. Football clubs were really struggling. It's not like today. It's not like the great product that football is. And to persuade fans to return to the football stadiums, the EFL actually rejected a big telly deal. It's the polar opposite, really, Manny, to what football is nowadays, really, isn't it? Because they would bite the hand off of Sky Sports, TNT, all the global broadcasters as well, for a slice of the pie. But what they wanted to do was they wanted to introduce something called the playoffs. And these playoffs were brought in firstly in the 1986-87 Football League season. They lasted for 2 years in their original guise. And that original guise was the 3 teams that had finished just behind the automatically promoted teams and the team that finished just above the automatically relegated team in the league above. Manny, I know you haven't been through playoff heartache and playoff joy like we have, but do you remember back to those days? I was very very little during that time, but do you remember playoffs coming in? And I've read a lot about it and how football changed and how people did, start getting attracted to those lower leagues because of this. But do you remember what it was like beforehand?
I'll be honest with you, Craig. I mean, my earliest memories of watching football, of course, would be on Sunday afternoons on ITV with Elton Wellesby, Jim Rosenthal and company.
Yes.
And of course, prior to that, on the Saturday evening, you'd have Grandstand on BBC with the entire motley crew of absolute legends back in the day. Interestingly enough, a large number of those people, after leaving the BBC, went on to work with ITV for a period of time. Go figure. And of course, ITV also on Saturday had a recap of the Saturday games, and it was really only the Sunday First Division game back then that was televised. And of course, on Grandstand, if there were any FA Cup games being played, those would also be televised, some select ones, of course, with the best action to come on Match of the Day later on in the evening.
Yeah.
And, the only football exposure I got was to the First Division. When it came to the Second Division, obviously I knew that there were several divisions that a lot of teams were playing, and obviously, when you had the roundup of the league results from the divisions, I knew of that. And I think I might have been vaguely aware of some playoffs, because I think it was in the 1990s I started watching after Italia 90, really getting into it, of course, after the heartbreak in Turin and all of that. And I'll be honest, because I never really got to see, Second Division football on the television, I never really followed it that much. It was mainly, the First Division games. And I would understand, of course, why they wanted to introduce some playoffs. And that concept which you mentioned about 3 teams from the Second Division and 1 team just above the relegation zone of the First Division, I think that would have been an interesting concept. But then when I started watching, there wasn't any such concept, because I think it might have been discontinued, as you said. And, it was just a straight relegation, 3 teams from the... I don't know if it was 3 teams necessarily, but it might have been, I think, yes. And 3 teams from the First Division, and then, the Second Division, you had your teams getting promoted, obviously. And then things changed in 92 with the advent of the Premier League. So the Second Division became the First Division. Everything changed, of course. And I think where we're getting at, and I think we'll probably sort of deal with this later, is when you talk about why the playoffs were instituted, I think it was probably to drum up a little bit more in terms of interest and some ticket sales, maybe, because, again, I think one of the biggest problems, again, and this might actually go even further back, is when any team would get fortunate enough to be promoted to the top division at the time, they'd probably have a little bit more in terms of the the TV coverage money and so forth, and how their finances were, sort of improved in that regard. Mm-hmm. We never really had TV coverage of the lower divisions, and that's what makes it all the more saddening. And of course, back in the day, satellite television wasn't even a thing until sometime in the early 90s, when Sky really came into being, I would say. But obviously, as the years went by, you had a lot more in terms of TV coverage. But you also consider that I'm based overseas. We don't get coverage of the lower divisions of the English Football League. It's only the Premiership. So there's so much in terms of jeopardy when it comes to earning promotion to the top division. And you, especially talking about how you've experienced the highs and lows of playoff action, you'll know how much it would mean to you, especially It's a money spinner now. So I can get why intrigue would be, drummed up for this.
I think, with playoffs, it is the best way to be promoted to, especially the top flight, is the best way to be promoted. It's the most enjoyable way to be promoted. It's not something that we've experienced in the championship playoffs. We've been in them once. Of course, that was against Brentford, won the first leg, was beaten in the second leg. Of course, the Chris Metham red card. I don't hold that against him, but it's those fine margins that do change these playoff matches, and can affect and change a whole club's season. Of course, that season Brentford went up. They were notorious for actually losing in the playoffs up until that point. But I'm looking at the earlier days as well, and how the 1987 playoff final happened, because it was quite interesting. Of course, after the first legs and the second legs in the semi-finals, there was the final. But in the final as well, there was a first leg and a second leg. And the actual first ever playoff at the second division, or what would be championship nowadays, playoff final, was between Charlton Athletic and Leeds United. Charlton won the first leg, Leeds won the second leg by the same scoreline, and then it went to a replay, which is quite interesting. There was no Wembley at that point. There was no going to Wembley and seeing what happened. There. I guess that kind of makes sense. Of course, Chelsea was relegated in the second playoff final, when they were beaten by Middlesbrough 2-1 on aggregate. They went to Ayresome Park, which is, of course, just before the Riverside Stadium for Middlesbrough, and then went to Stamford Bridge, with Chelsea chasing a 2-goal deficit, and Chelsea only won 1-0. Do you think, with regards to playoff finals, Manny, because I've seen a few. I've seen, I watch it literally every season because I find them interesting, intriguing. There's always something about wanting that underdog to do something, unless your team's in it. It's always quite exciting to see that. But this two-legged playoff final. I know that Pep Guardiola has said about how he wanted and we'll come on to the FA Cup at one point. He wanted the replays of FA Cup games to be abolished, but for a playoff final, I think that's quite good to have one at home, one away, with a replay. I quite like that idea, and I like the idea of the team above. At this current point in time, the team that would have been pulled into the championship playoffs, for example, in this method, would be Spurs. I think that would be quite interesting.
Oh, it could be interesting indeed. And obviously with regard to the issue of having a replay for the final, and I do, if memory serves me right, the FA Cup did have a replay of the final because, if memory serves me right, in 1990, Crystal Palace and Manchester United drew 3-3, and that was, of course, Jim Leighton's final game for Manchester United because Alex Ferguson dropped him for Les Sealey, Lord rest his soul. And, of course, back in the day, you didn't quite have the glut of matches that are being played these days. But there is, of course, a reason why Pep Guardiola wanted the replays to be scrapped. And obviously the biggest debate about the replays was how it would affect the lower clubs in the FA Cup when they'd be drawn against some of the bigger teams. But, that's a debate for another day, and I've got my views on that too. I think now, of course, it's fair to say that you wouldn't be able to have a situation where you have a two-legged playoff because, Wembley seems to be, the stadium that's being preferred, although I think the Millennium Stadium could also step in the event of a scheduling clash or what have you. And I think a large number of people these days, they can't seem to be able to tolerate the extra tension and the jeopardy that comes with a replay. Because let's say, for example, you play your hearts out and you draw, and you got to play a second replay. You got to play a first replay, of course, and you end up drawing that, and a second replay. The second replay, I think it's fair to say, might be the one that would be expected to decide everything. But then if you draw that and that and that, and of course you only need to take a look in 1991 when Liverpool played Everton in the FA Cup, that famous 4-4 draw was the final straw for Kenny Dalglish as manager of Liverpool Football Club. He resigned after that because obviously he'd be going through quite a bit of emotional turmoil that particular season. So while the idea of final replays would have been good back in the day, I think there's a reason why you won't see them happening now. And it's just, yes, you may get some revenue from the tickets, but it just costs so much to organize football matches these days because they're literal money spinners. And certainly, at least in the UK, I'm not too sure about overseas, but definitely in the UK and maybe, the Republic of Ireland, if they get, Sky Sports or TNT. I think they might. A lot of my Irish friends have told me that they do get some English British channel feeds. There will be coverage of the lower division playoffs, but on a global scale, not very much. And I'd be lucky if I were to see, if I were to get coverage of, say, the Championship playoff final coming on my television screen. If it sort of depends on the whims, really, of the sporting providers that I have. But having replays for finals, I think it's fair to say, probably wouldn't work these days. And believe it or not, the interesting thing about what you mentioned with regard to the 1987 playoffs, I do believe that in certain European leagues, in Germany, and I think also in Scotland, for instance, they actually do have a relegation playoff between the team that finishes I think it's at the bottom of the Scottish Premier League, and also the no, it won't be at the bottom. It'll be at a similar position to where you were saying. Mm-hmm. So you'd have a very low-placed team in the Premier League against a very high-placed team in the Scottish Championship, and there'd be a playoff between them to decide who would possibly end up. Which team, for example, would either get promoted, which team would get relegated, or if those teams would stay where they are. So that idea of actually having a playoff between teams of different divisions, that actually does create a great deal of jeopardy in many ways. And so for Spurs, well, you did mention, of course, that as of right now, they are 17th. And
yes,
we now know that Igor Tudor has sadly left by mutual consent. He lost his father very recently, so condolences to his family. And so that club is now lurching into one crisis after another. And to think that last season they were Europa League champions. So I think if you were to introduce a playoff between them and a team in the Championship, yes, it would definitely create a lot of jeopardy, a lot of drama, and it would be, must-see TV. But I'm not too sure that Spurs would necessarily want to subject their fans to that sort of torture. And in reality, in reality, again, as I've said, with the huge glut of games that are being played all around the country in every single division, I just don't know if that would necessarily be feasible, or whether or not there would be a date in the calendar. In Scotland, for instance, you wouldn't have that problem because there aren't as many teams.
I think it would be absolutely brilliant to have that, team just above the relegation zone pulled into the Championship playoffs, and would have to win their place back. The danger of that is that football, and especially the Premier League, has become very, very money orientated between even the second and third tier in England now. So between the Championship and League One, all you have to do is look at the teams that seem to be successful in League One. And of course, Cardiff look like they are going to get straight back out. of the Championship, out of League One, I should say, back to the Championship. Luton look like they're hovering around the playoffs. And then you look at the teams around there. Fair play to Lincoln City. They've done very, very well. But you look at the likes of Huddersfield, Reading, Bolton Wanderers. They're all teams that have been there, done that, got the T-shirt. So that divide, again, would effectively open up a whole can of worms that a team might not get through the playoffs because of the financial muscle in football nowadays. I just want to go back, of course, to where the playoffs were, and especially the Championship playoffs, because there was one other season after relegated or the team in the league above was taken out of the equation, where they had it over 2 legs. But here's a question for you, Manny. Do you know who the first team was to win the second tier or the highest level of playoffs in England, and what happened?
No, I don't, and I'm going to have to do some, studying on that. But I'm sure you've researched that, so please tell me, good sir.
I've researched it. So the first team to won the top level of the playoffs in England was Swindon Town. So Swindon Town were the first team to win the playoffs at Wembley over 1 leg, but they weren't promoted to the Premier League what was Division 1 at that point, because of financial irregularities. So the team that actually they beat in the final, which was Sunderland, actually went up, which kind of defeats the object. Here's a big question. There's a lot of teams that have come through the playoffs, and there's a bit of a roll of the dice. We've seen this at a number of clubs where teams gamble. Some of these teams fail to go up, and then therefore the likes of Derby and Reading, then end up in financial disarray. Some of these teams do end up getting promoted, but should there be that rule put in place, considering Swindon fell foul of it? Of course, they did actually get promoted to the top flight a couple of years later in 1993 by beating Leicester City 4-3 in the final at Wembley. But should teams be prevented nowadays if there is any financial irregularities, despite them winning that playoff final?
Ooh, what a good question that is. And mind you, that particular question, mind you, also has ramifications for other prizes, especially when it comes to what we call financial irregularities. And of course, one thing which I did read about when it came to that Swindon playoff final against Leicester, a certain Glenn Hoddle was player manager for Swindon Town, and he actually scored in that final. So 5 years after retiring from international football, he showed that he could still kick it with the best. And of course, as we all know, he left John Gorman in the lurch and went on to play and manage Chelsea. Also played in the 94 FA Cup final, if memory serves me right. But, the question of financial irregularities is always going to be a bit of an issue. And it segues back to that episode we did about rogue owners and how Sheffield Wednesday have literally been, just devastated by the whole thing. And now, they face a very, very uncertain future. And it's it's my hope definitely that they can somehow, rise up from that once again and solve all of their issues. And there's a bit of a slippery slope, because there are at least quite a few clubs in certain divisions, including 1 or 2 Premiership clubs, that have to be very careful how they conduct themselves financially, because their own financial situations, if not perilous, can certainly be a bit of a problem. And there's a reason why Aston Villa, falling foul of PSR, have to make sure they reach the Champions League this season, either by winning the Europa League or finishing in the top 4, soon to be top 5, because we're well ahead in the coefficient race, because that gives them more revenue to be able to work around any kind of regulations. But then we also had situations where, for all of their financial, jiggery pokery, Chelsea were just given a comparative slap on the wrist. And we don't even know what's going to happen with, Manchester City. But again, with the issue of financial irregularities, we've seen teams, Craig, be given points deductions for financial irregularities. So I would like to think that if certain teams have been, punished for that and still managed to find a way to, do as well as they possibly can, subjecting them to that sort of draconian rule would not really be fair to them. And I would definitely like to think that all of these issues surrounding financial irregularities will be taken care of away from the field. They should hire some good litigators and some good accountants to help them, get their numbers right, make sure they somehow try to balance the books. So, of course, back in the day, I think our good friend Eugen will tell you that when Spurs were owned by Baron Sugar, they actually had been subjected to points deductions and some punishments for their own financial irregularities back in the day. And it was really only when ENIC took over that a lot of the financial worries were sort of quashed, although it's come at a huge cost to the sporting side of things in many ways, as we're seeing. But to answer your question, no, I don't think so, because when it comes to financial irregularities, they may already be punished off the field. To further, punish them on the field by saying you can't compete in this in these playoffs and give yourselves a chance of earning more money, I think that would be a little bit counterproductive. And if anything, it's sort of like the the Moneyball shot, which they could possibly have to help them climb out of that mess. But as we all know, even if you do earn some revenue in football, you immediately have to pay back your the people who've loaned you money or the people to whom you owe money. And it's not going to be very easy. But that's, if anything, there's a wonderful piece in the Telegraph which speaks about Aston Villa's issue and why they're a feel-good story this year. And their problems are nothing, mind you, compared to other clubs who are suffering from financial issues. So, I think they should be allowed to compete, especially if you're giving clubs points deductions. You don't just want to, further pound them into the dirt. No, let them compete.
I tell you what, that's going to be another topic for another week. Points deductions. Get ready for that one. But to be honest, before we go on to why the playoffs might be a problem moving forwards, there was a golden age for the playoffs, and of course it started with that Swindon Town win over Leicester City, a 4-3 win. This following season, Leicester got back, they beat Derby County, and then, believe it or not, and everybody knows I was originally born and bred in Reading. Everybody knows that story. Was a playoff final that I was at, which was the Division 1 playoff final between Reading and Bolton Wanderers.
Yes, a certain Shaka Hislop was in goal for Reading during that time, right?
Yes, he was. And it is thought of, and it's a some people will go, and honestly, if you're watching and in the comments, put which one you feel out of these two was the better one. The game between Reading and Bolton Wanderers is right up there. The other one that is comparable is between Charlton Athletic and Sunderland. I don't know if you remember the 4-4 game. I think it was it 98? I think it was about 3 years later. Yeah, 1998. But I remember that. And although it was not a pleasant experience, because of course I was wanting Reading to win that playoff final. I was with the family. It was all born and bred in Reading. There was a coach. It was all very, very old school, and it was probably why football and the playoffs is such a good advert. To give you the context, Reading went 1-0 up after 4 minutes. Then they went 2-0 up. First one was Lee Nogan. Second one was Adrian Williams. Then Reading had a penalty to make it 3-0. Now, had they scored that, and it was a guy called Stuart Lovell, if Reading had scored that and gone 3-0 up, that probably would have been game over. But it was saved by Keith Brannigan. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember that
Brannigan.
name. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I remember him. Yeah, that's
And
right.
then what happened was Owen Coyle scored, I think, with about 15 minutes from time. And he's definitely not a hero in Reading. I can assure you that. He's not particularly a liked man in Reading, but a gentleman called Fabian De Freitas, then
Yes,
I
De
believe he
Freitas.
come on the pitch, and he had probably his best game of his career. And this is why playoff finals and why it is such a good advert for the EFL. It might not have been very pleasant that day, but it's such a good advert because he come on, he scored the equaliser. Of course, Bolton went 3-2 up, and then he scored a second of the game to make it 4-2 before Reading come back with a consolation at the end. That, whilst it was me effectively on the losing side during that game, actually shows what is great about football, what's great about the playoffs. And everybody remembers, I'm sure, on this channel, the conversation that Steve Fletcher had when he fell foul and lost the playoff final. He went back into that 2003 playoff final against Lincoln City with more determination, and it meant so much more. And it was possibly one of the highest points of his career. That's what playoffs is all about. That is the advert. That is what the EFL is selling, isn't it, Manny? Only me. Sorry to interrupt your viewing pleasure, but I need to tell you about our two sponsors. Now, our first sponsor is Touchpoint Telecoms at touchpointtelecoms.co.uk for all your business telecoms needs for everywhere from Reading to Runcorn and everywhere north and south in between. And also Dental on the Banks at dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Here is a little bit about them now.
I should be like you, Mel.
So there we go. Thank you for checking us out. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell button below. Let's get on with the video.
Absolutely. And another big piece of trivia is that the Bolton manager was none other than a certain Bruce David Rioch, who left Bolton to come and manage Arsenal.
Yes.
Sadly, he didn't last very long, but we all know what happened after he left. And
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Everything that you said right there, Craig, about why the playoffs are so good, especially the level of jeopardy and how, you know, the winner takes it all, as Agnetha Falkestog brilliantly sang back in the day. You know, and it is that level of jeopardy, and you do get that level of excitement. And, you know, the disappointment will be all the more acute. And certainly for Reading, that defeat would have been all the more devastating. In fact, it was Jimmy Quinn, player-manager of Reading, who got the consolation goal that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But that actually was Xhaka's final act with Reading, as he went on to join Newcastle United after being signed by a certain Joseph Kevin Keegan, who, as we all know, is undergoing treatment for cancer. I hope he fights it and has a really good recovery.
Most definitely.
But again, it's the excitement, the jeopardy, the prospect of being richly rewarded, and I've got a snippet of the table. In fact, Bolton actually were 2 points behind Reading in the final table, with Middlesbrough having already gone through as champions. And I think it was actually after that season that the number of teams who could compete for promotion to the Premiership actually increased. So sadly, Reading, I think, were just a little bit ahead of the boat, as it were. But it's sad in many ways. But as we all know, since then, Reading did have the honour of being promoted to the Premiership on quite a few occasions.
Yes.
Once or twice. So, I mean, if anything, it's a representation of life in that, when you win, to the victor go the spoils. And when you get knocked down, you can either, stay down or just get back up and keep fighting. And that's actually what Reading chose to do, to their great credit.
It was only for the one season that was reduced to one team being promoted automatically and one team going through the playoffs, because any other season it would have been the 3 up. But as you probably remember, there was the restructuring of the Premier League that season.
Yes, that's right.
Which I believe Crystal Palace went down, didn't they? I'm trying to think of the other teams that was actually relegated from the Premier League that season. But effectively, it meant that there was only 2 teams that went up. So Reading would have been promoted on a normal season. Seeing as they were one of the smaller teams in the league, it was probably, something that was quite disappointing at the time. It was Reading were playing at a ground called Elm Park. And this is the great thing. Again, we segue into the playoffs. It's that underdog story. But I am going to throw a spin into this. So the playoffs have been working really, really well since then. So why do you feel that the EFL have decided to change it to follow effectively what the National League does? So effectively, the team that finishes 8th could still get promoted. So this is how it would work. So first and second promoted automatically as normal. The third and fourth would qualify for the semi-finals. Then there would be a game between the team in 5th and the team in 8th, and the team in 6th and 7th as one-off eliminated ties at the home of the side who finishes higher up in the league. So, say for example, let's say Millwall and Preston. Millwall finish 5th, Preston finish 8th. It would be played at the New Den. Then the winners of the eliminator progress to the semi-finals, facing the 3rd and the 4th in the format that currently exists. I believe the 5th and the 8th go to play the 3rd team, the 6th and the 7th go to play the 4th place team, and then the 2 teams who win that semi-final play at Wembley. But what worries me about this, Manny, and I'd love your opinion on this, is a team who have been relegated from the Premier League, who've not had a particularly good season, could finish 8th. That team could then get promoted, which kind of limits. And of course, that team will have more might in the transfer market. Look at what Southampton have done this season. They were right down at the bottom of the Championship, and no, not knocking Southampton at all. They're right down at the bottom of the Championship, and they've managed to move themselves into a position like we're talking about now. And in fact, I think they're just inside the playoffs now, which is all to their credit. But if they finished eighth, because they've had that financial muscle, they could get straight through to the Premier League. Does this create more opportunity, or does this create less opportunity by meaning that a team who have been relegated find it easier?
Very interesting. And of course, it's funny you mentioned Southampton. They played quite brilliantly to also eliminate Fulham from the FA Cup quite recently. And we're actually going over to St Mary's to play them in the quarterfinals. And the way we actually played in the League Cup final the day before yesterday, that was quite disgraceful. And, you know, the less said about Mansfield Town, the better. I don't even want to, you know, underestimate Southampton, because they could definitely spring one or two shocks. And, you know, this FA Cup has had more than a few shocks. So they could end up becoming shock FA Cup semi-finalists, and we'll see how far they go from here. I don't want to jinx it. And back to your question. Look, Southampton did what they had to do, obviously, given the state they were in, having been relegated, obviously. And, you know, they found their way back up, and now they're sort of competing. I'm not going to begrudge them their recovery and where they should be, but like you, Craig, I'm also not really in favour of increasing the number of teams that could, you know, potentially compete, because the way I look at it, when you have a situation where you've got, I think it's 24 teams in the Championship now, right? Because each team plays 46 games. So you've effectively got the top six, which are sort of like the top 25, as it were. And those teams, more often than not, would be the teams that would have consistently played well enough to be in those playoff spots, and they would end up deserving their position. And I think if you were to take a look at a bigger sample size, you'd see the teams that would finish as low as 8th or lower would just not have the consistency, would not have had the consistency required to make sure they would even reach the playoffs, much less, you know, the top two, and get promoted a lot more easily. So the very idea that you could reward that sort of stuff with 7th and 8th, forget about the financial shot in the arm that, you know, Southampton got. I just don't know if it would necessarily be fair in any way to reward inconsistency that way. And it also, in many ways, segues into how the Champions League, as we now know it, has kind of diluted in quality, because it used to be, as you know, back in the day, only the champions from each leagues that would go into a straight knockout competition. And so, you know, they'd be sort of drawn against one another. They would have to, it would basically be winner takes all, dog eat dog. But now, because of what they call the league and bringing more teams in, you'll find a situation where teams who aren't quite as consistent end up somehow managing to go a long way, and end up somehow going on and winning it. And although that's sort of the way it's become, and we kind of have to roll with the punches, I'm not too sure that the Championship should follow that particular idea. So, no, I'm not really in favour of that, because, again, as I said, it isn't just about the financial muscle that teams like Southampton will have. It just doesn't seem fair to reward teams that just aren't able to really, you know, do what they have to do and be as consistent as they should be to get up to the level required to be in contention for a spot in the playoffs. And I just don't think it's really the best idea. The only reason why they'd want to do it is to provide more drama, more intrigue, more matches being played, more in terms of ticket sales. And I think that could in many ways lead to, I mean, I wouldn't say lead to is not the best thing to be said, but it boils down to what I should say, the huge gap in financial muscle between the Premiership and some of the lower leagues. And we all know that when you get promoted to the Premier League, the reward that you get is absolutely huge. And especially when you compare that to the pittances that you get for winning the FA Cup or the League Cup these days, as you know, has been found out. it's just the big thing for me, Craig, is that there needs to be a reshuffle, a rejigging of the financial pyramid, in my opinion, so that you won't have that much of a disparity between the teams at the very top and the teams at the lower level. You know, all we're doing is effectively increasing the level of footballing financial inequality, and that's always going to be a big problem for teams that just can't just comparatively don't have the ability to bring themselves up by their bootstraps, as it were, to use that phrase, because effectively the bootstraps are being, you know, either snipped at or being taken away from them. Like I said, we've got to make sure that you know, we reduce the level of financial inequality rather than having more matches being played. Because again, yes, it provides a great incentive and there's a lot of jeopardy and drama, but it can be devastating for teams that miss out. And I did say that, you know, you can either stay down or get back up after being knocked down, but it's easier said than done for certain teams. And we've seen some Premiership teams, mind you, suffer because they made a huge financial gamble with, you know, by trying to basically leverage, you know, their current state for the prospect of greater success by borrowing more money than they could have and then having to, you know, end up selling their best players to balance the books. In a nutshell, I don't like seeing this proposal of more teams being added to the playoffs. I don't think it serves much of a purpose. I don't think it'll be fair in many ways. And I just think that, you know, just keep it the way it is, because the more you try to add more games, the more effectively you end up diluting the quality, in my opinion. I just don't think it would be really worth it. And there are so many old school fans who will tell you that ever since the decisions to expand the number of teams competing in the Champions League, I mean, what was then the European Cup and then the UEFA Cup and so forth, the quality seems to have slightly been diluted a great deal. And we see more often than not the more established teams competing for the top prizes. So you very rarely, if ever, will get a situation where you have a Nottingham Forest winning back-to-back European Cups under Brian Clough, or even Aston Villa the following season winning under Ron Saunders. But that's a debate for another day. So no, I don't like this proposal for the Championship playoffs. I don't.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I think we're both in agreement, you know, like with the example there, you know, with Bolton, Reading, Sunderland, Charlton, those playoff finals were great because they were exciting. There is that hero that always emerges, in that case Fabian de Freitas for Bolton, you know, who pops up and, you know, surprises everybody and becomes etched in history. But I just can't see expanding. The Championship playoff final is known as the £140 million game. It's probably worth even more than that now, but that's what they always mention it as. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get more people and teams involved in that game, which again, I think, and I agree with you, will just dilute the whole thing. But that's great for the Championship because it's going to be bringing in more money for those clubs. But if you're going to do it, you have to do it across all leagues. And, you know, what I found out is that the EFL have approved this expansion, but they're rolling out changes to League One and League Two. You know,
Absolutely.
So, you know, if you're going to do it for the Championship, you have to do it for League One and League Two as well. Or, better still, just leave it the same. I'm not a fan, and I disagree with it. And I'll say something now. I think that, you know, the promotion and relegation between the National League and League Two should be 2 up and then 4 in the playoffs as well. I, you know, personally am not a fan of 1 up and 1 other up through the playoffs. I think the National League has shown that it is a good enough league to effectively be League 3 in this country. But if you are going to have it for the Championship, you have to have it for League One, League Two, and I think the National League also has to follow suit. It doesn't make. It just feels wrong.
It is wrong, absolutely. Because if you're not going to do it for every single member of that pyramid, as you say, you are effectively increasing the level of footballing inequality. And I love what you said there about the promotion between the National League and the Football League, because, forget about the fact that several of these non-league teams have over the years provided some terrific results in the FA Cup. Look at Macclesfield and Crystal Palace, the defending champions, being knocked out by a non-league team. Yeah. That probably puts the Hereford Newcastle United tie from back in the day sort of into shade right now, because at one point, as you will know, Macclesfield were pretty much wound up, and then they were repurchased, and then they were brought back to life, and now they've had their amazing moment, only for Brentford, spoilers, to end their wonderful run. And then look at Wrexham. I mean, not too long ago, they asked Ben Foster to have an Indian summer with them just to extend his career, and he got them from the National League into the Football League, retired not too long afterwards. But then they've risen wonderfully. They're in the Championship, they're in the playoffs, they're in the mix for potential promotion. And look at their rise. I mean, it's been amazing. And, the more non-league teams you see being able to fight their way back and come back into it, the better. Because several of these non-league teams, mind you, were in the Football League for a period of time and ended up, sadly losing their way. Look at Oldham Athletic, who were founder members of the Premier League, and they lost their way for a period of time, but they found their way back, and, well done to them. But you also want to see more non-league teams coming in, and I get that the FA Cup is just, a knockout tournament where on the day, if you perform well, you get your reward. But you are spot on when you say that several of these non-league teams are actually good enough in terms of quality to be competing, at least in League Two, maybe even, try and survive in League One. I mean, if they're if the standard is that good, I believe they could. So you've got to give them some more opportunities. And if you're going to just give the Championship teams more of an opportunity because that's where the money is, but not work to try and improve the state of the game all around, especially in the the footballing pyramid, then that's just stupid. And bear in mind, these lower division non-league teams, they don't play too many other games outside their own divisions and the cups, so they certainly don't play in Europe as far as I know. So these are the type of teams that will benefit a lot more from having having more games being played. At least at the very at the very least, they can have a better source of revenue, but they get a lot more exposure and also televise some of those playoff games, as you mentioned, and just let more money come in so that you can actually bring some of these lower non-league teams up, and then that filters more down. The biggest problem with trickle-down economics, as we all know, and I'm sorry for bringing politics and economics into this, is that trickle-down is just a trick. More often than not, it stays more or less near the top and only just, comes down a little bit, and people are supposed to, scavenge for that. That's stupid. I think, and I'm sorry for using that severe language, but that's how I feel about it. So with the football, if the FA were really serious about, ensuring the health of the game, it's the teams around the middle and the lower areas who could really benefit from having extra games. So instead of increasing the Championship playoffs, and I'm really proud of you for saying so, you've got to have that same thing for the football, for the teams in the lower divisions and the non-league teams. They're the ones who deserve more of these benefits. So I applaud you for saying that, dear sir.
And, I think that, really the National League should be effectively a League Three. The playoffs shouldn't really be changed. I think there should be standardization across all leagues. One thing that has always confused me is why there's four down and 4 up between League One and League Two. Again, I think that should be abolished. I think that it should be 3 down, 3 up. You can't tell me as well, like, and I completely agree with you. You look at the teams that have come out of the National League. You look at Wrexham doing fantastically well. Bromley, believe it or not, who were promoted a couple of years back, a very, very small team. They are top of League Two. So these teams have shown success. And you look at the teams at the top of the National League: Rochdale, York, Carlisle, Boreham Wood, Scunthorpe, Forest Green, Halifax. Those teams, you can't tell me that those teams would struggle against the likes of Tranmere, Crawley, Newport, Harrogate, and Barrow. This is why I think, if anything, forget about the Championship playoffs, because it was a great product. It will remain a great product if they leave it in the exact same way. This is why, more should be looked at the bottom of the pyramid rather than the top. Because I could create a scenario now that, let's say, for example, Wrexham finish the season in 4th place. They have a really, really, really good run. Now, I'm sorry, Southampton fans, I'm going to pick on you again because you've shot straight up the league, and that's only to your credit. But if Southampton then get into 8th spot, because of their financial muscle, they could take the place of a team that originally, who would have been in those playoffs originally when they wouldn't have been. I honestly don't think that the expansion in the Championship works for the greater good. It's more for those teams that are relegated out of the Premier League to get an instant return. As soon as I saw it, and there was a couple of people that said it builds more opportunity, but I think it will cause more inequality in football.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I said it. It isn't the Championship that needs more of these games. It's the lower leagues and the National League that needs more of these games. And as I said, forget about the issue of financial muscle. We now know, of course, that it's the teams from 5th to 8th that will be competing against each other in that preliminary stage. And then they qualify for the semi-finals where, they come up against 3rd and 4th. Again, as I've said, I completely agree with you. You don't want to have a situation where a team in 7th or 8th that would normally not be good enough to qualify for the playoffs on their own merit, on the basis of their consistency, could end up being given a chance. Because, let's say, for example, if Southampton were to continue their run and actually, end up in the playoff places from 3rd to 6th on merit, then, as much as you may have a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? A disdain towards them. You've got to say that they would have earned it. But if they finish in 8th and still make the playoffs in this new format, I'm sorry, but there's no way that we can give them that much in terms of credit. And it's funny how you mention that it would be an opportunity for relegated teams to find their way back up. But then we all know what happened with Leicester. 10 years ago, they were Premiership champions. They also won an FA Cup in between. They reached a Champions League quarterfinal, a Conference League semi-final. But since then, we all know what's happened to them, and we don't even know now if they will find their way back up. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that when you're in the Championship and you are trying to compete as either a relegated Premiership team trying to get back, or a team that's been stuck in the Championship for quite some time and you want to sort of, get to the top for the first time or just come back after a gap of a few years, that is really a league where it's literally dog eat dog. And the more consistent teams, in my opinion, should be rewarded. I don't want to see a situation where teams that finish in 7th or 8th somehow find a back door and end up coming in. And a lot of people will say, the friends of yours who said that it's a way of providing some more opportunity, and maybe we'll find out how good they really are. And I suppose, you're right. If they do end up losing in that first playoff round and not making the semi-finals, it ends up becoming moot anyway. And then if they do manage to go through, you kind of wonder about the unfairness of it all. But you already have that level of that sort of question when, you have 4 teams competing and you have a situation where the team that finishes in 6th ends up making the playoff final and winning it and going on to play in the Premiership. I mean, that in itself may perhaps be bad enough because it's only among 4 teams, but to increase it to 6, and then my biggest fear is, where does it stop? Do you increase it to 8 teams and even go further than that? Mate, it's gone mad. It's ridiculous. And as you said, whether or not it's a case of trying to help relegated teams, get back in or otherwise, I really, really don't like the direction in which it's going. And to not have the same idea done for the EFL teams or the National League teams, I think it's disgraceful. And there are other stronger words I could use, but I just don't know if the context would be right. But I'm seething, absolutely seething.
Well, I think we both agree the playoffs is a good thing, but football has a problem because they keep making changes to things that aren't broken. So, yes, it's been a really, really good debate, this. Of course, the next one we're going to do on Football Has a Problem is something that we're in the middle of now, and that is an international break. We'll save that for another time. But Manny, are you going to be in for the international break?
Oh, I'll be in. Don't worry about it. I mean, obviously, England have got some friendlies lined up. I will be very interested, mind you, to see how both the Irish teams and the Welsh teams do. And I remember sending you a BBC article about Bournemouth's very own David Brooks, who's, recovered wonderfully from cancer, now wants to be a part of Wales's attempt to reach another World Cup, having missed out in 22, I should say. And obviously, ex-Cherries Chris Mepham and Kiefer Moore will be very eager to try to get back there. Northern Ireland are coming up against Italy, which will be very, very interesting indeed. Italy are a team internationally in an existential crisis. If they fail to qualify for a 3rd consecutive World Cup, that will be an absolute disaster. And then, of course, there's the Republic of Ireland, who I think are playing the Czech Republic. If we can have a situation where more and more home nations teams join England and Scotland in the World Cup, it will be absolutely wonderful and a real shot in the arm. We nearly had it in Euro 2016, but Scotland couldn't make it. And now Scotland have risen from the ashes, but the Irish teams have sort of fallen a little bit behind. So I hope we can get them back in. As far as England are concerned, as I said, the friendlies, I'm not really reading too much into that. And I trust that Tuchel, after his experimental phase in selecting his squad, will definitely do the right thing in trimming down his squad, maybe improving it or whatever. Dominic Solanke in the squad, despite scoring only 3 goals for Tottenham. I'll tell you what, though, he'll always have Bournemouth and he'll always be a European champion, so you can't take that away from him.
Exactly, mate. Well, there we are. That's the next one. So keep us in mind. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell button for the next one, the international break. But Manny, it's been a pleasure as always. A little bit shorter than our VAR one. Do go back and watch the Rogue Owners and also the VAR discussion. You've got 2 hours worth of listening to do, but I would break it down into segments if you want. But thank you so much to people that have already watched it. It's got some massive viewers and also a massive amount of listeners as well. I don't know if people are listening to it all in the one go though, but kudos to you if you do. But from me, from Manny, thank you again for joining us. Football has got a problem. It's the playoffs. Just bloody leave them alone. Thanks.
Yeah, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Absolutely.
Exactly. See you in the next one.
Talksport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the Talksport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search Talksport Fan Network.